Well, joining us to discuss all that is Patrice Lee Onwuka, Senior Fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So for years, the U.S. has really judged labor success by this all-encompassing unemployment rate. Is that still the most accurate way, though, to paint a picture of what's happening in the labor market?
Well, it's not probably the most accurate way to figure out exactly what's going on with the labor market, but it's what we have. And I think people have come to rely on it, from policymakers to economists, because it gives us a snapshot of kind of the health. There's a psychological aspect to it. It either inspires confidence, and we see that play out in the stock market, or it can inspire some real concern, and that's when the Federal Reserve will step in to try to take some sort of monetary measures to maybe try to correct things. But people look for it because it's supposed to give us what's going on with the economy. Unfortunately, it's not perfect. It's actually very imperfect, and it leaves out a lot of American workers, and it doesn't give us a full picture of what the economy really looks like for the workforce.
So in terms of that full picture, what do you think would present a more accurate idea of what's actually happening then?
Well, when the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually releases its numbers, it tends to report the U3 number, which is just the basic unemployment number. But it leaves out those Americans who are unemployed or are employed but working part-time and would rather have full-time jobs. Those are called involuntary part-time workers. Then you also have another 1.8 million people who are still interested in working but have not been able to find a job for the past 12 months. And that's because the Bureau of Labor Statistics only looks at those people who've been out of work but looking actively for the past 4 weeks. That's a very short span of time. So you've got lots of Americans, and particularly looking at the Trump supporters and those who elected him into office, you have a lot of Americans who feel like they've been left behind in this economic recovery, and they don't see themselves captured in these jobs numbers.
And certainly an issue is the quality of a lot of these jobs. That's still an ongoing issue. Now let's turn to Trump's America First policy. Which industries do you think will really have the most to gain by his proposals?
Well, ideally, manufacturing, which is, as you would in the previous segment, we're supposed to see that manufacturing jobs would come back. And right now they represent 8 or 9% of the workforce. But in the 1970s, it was 22%. So this idea that we can go back to a time where manufacturing jobs really help people get to the American dream of, owning your own house, being able to have a family, put your kids through school, that's not really happening. And in part because even if you get more manufacturing jobs back here, they're going to be higher skilled jobs, and many of them are just going to be relying on robots because honestly, a lot of technology has allowed us to be much more productive than we did before. Retail is another industry that I think we can expect this kind of buy first, American first mantra to see some boost. We saw retail jobs increase under the Obama administration, but those are part-time jobs. Those are low-skilled workers, low-skilled jobs, not exactly the kind of jobs that you want to raise your family on. So, I'm not sure exactly what we're going to see, but I do think the Trump administration is trying to make an effort to really get people who have been unemployed for a long time, who have dropped out or just discouraged, back into the workforce.
Now, with that being said, though, what about industries that could be adversely affected? I mean, we know he's promoting coal, a lot of these industries which may or may not come back because of things like technology and innovations with robots. Who's going to really bear the brunt of some of these changes?
Well, the low-skilled workers, unfortunately. It's going to be people who may have a high school diploma, but they don't have much more than that, or don't have very specific skills that are needed to run the machinery that is needed for manufacturing. And so I think as a nation, we need to start thinking through over the next 10, 20 years, how are we preparing young people who are graduating from high school, graduating, if they do go to college, graduating from college, for the jobs that are going to exist. And when we look at some of the research and the studies out there, we see that these are the jobs that are going to rely a lot on creativity, on that intelligence, on that human connection, and are not going to easily be replaced because they're mundane tasks.
Now, Patrice, obviously, the U.S. very interconnected with global trade. So what about the countries that could be most affected by some of these changes that we're seeing in the policies?
Well, from a country perspective, lots of countries that tend to import that we tend to import from, I think they could potentially be affected. But at the end of the day, I think we want to make sure and understand why is it that so many jobs have gone overseas? Why have U.S. companies felt like it's cheaper to produce, goods and services overseas? And that has a lot to do with our regulatory system. It has a lot to do with our tax code. So it's exciting to hear Congress and the administration talking about tax reform for both individuals as well as companies.
Well, I'm sure companies will certainly be bracing for impact. Thank you so much, Patrice Lee Onwuka, Senior Fellow at the Independent Women's Forum.